become death, the destroyer of worlds.
Hello, friends. On July 16, 1945, at around 5:30 in the morning, in the deserts of the U.S. state of New Mexico, a massive explosion took place. But this was no ordinary bomb blast. This was the first-ever nuclear bomb test in human history. This nuclear test was given the code name Trinity, and the entire project was led by scientist J. Robert Oppenheimer. When Oppenheimer witnessed the explosion, he was stunned. According to his calculations, the bomb's yield should have been around 0.3 kilotons of TNT. But in reality, it was nearly 50 times more powerful, about 15 to 20 kilotons of TNT. The blast generated such intense heat that the steel tower at the site completely vaporized. The shock wave was felt up to 160 kilometers away, and after the explosion, a mushroom-shaped cloud rose about 12 kilometers into the sky. Seeing this scene, a verse from the Bhagavad Gita naturally came to Oppenheimer's mind. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. You might wonder, how did Oppenheimer even know about the Bhagavad Gita? We'll talk about that later in this video. And now, with a new film directed by Christopher Nolan being released about him, this seems like the perfect time to tell his story. Who was he, really? How did he develop the atomic bomb? Was Oppenheimer truly a hero or a villain? And after creating a weapon that took hundreds of thousands of lives, what did he feel? We'll explore all of this in this video. Julius Robert Oppenheimer, widely known as the father of the atomic bomb. He was also the director of the Manhattan Project, the program that created the world's first nuclear weapons. Our story begins in his childhood. He was born in 1904 in New York City to a German Jewish family. From a young age, he earned a reputation as a child genius. By the age of just 10, he was already studying advanced physics and chemistry. He had a deep fascination with mineralogy, the study of minerals, and possessed an extraordinary understanding of their properties. Such was his expertise that, at the age of 12, he was invited to give a lecture at the New York Mineralogical Club. In 1922, he began his studies at Harvard University and completed the 4-year degree in just 3 years, graduating at the top of his class. He majored in chemistry, but also explored physics, philosophy, literature, and Eastern religion. Yet, during his time at Harvard, he realized that his true passion was physics. By 1927, at just 23 years old, he had completed his Ph.D. But behind this genius, there was also a darker side. According to friends, Oppenheimer had self-destructive tendencies. He was a chain smoker and suffered from depression. At one point, he even told his brother, "I need physics more than I need friends." His focus was entirely on academics, caring little about what was happening in the outside world. At least, until the early 1930s. After witnessing the rise of Adolf Hitler in Germany, Oppenheimer became more politically aware. Because of Hitler's dictatorship, many German scientists fled the country and took refuge in the United States. This list included some of the greatest minds: Albert Einstein, John von Neumann, Leo Szilard, Hans Bethe, Edward Teller, Enrico Fermi. Most of them were German Jews, and Oppenheimer himself came from a German Jewish family. Seeing the persecution of Jews deeply affected him, and his interest in politics began to grow. In 1936, he said, "I began to understand how deeply political and economic events affect people's lives. I felt a need to participate in this community as well." Influenced by left-wing ideology, he attended many political meetings and donated money to several labor unions and striking farm workers. Then came September 1939. Hitler invaded Poland, and World War II began. The United States was not particularly eager to join the war. America was preparing for the worst. In fact, about a month before the war began, in August 1939, Albert Einstein and Leo Szilard wrote a letter to U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt. In this letter, they warned that Hitler was working on nuclear weapons and might succeed in developing an extremely powerful bomb. They urged the United States to be prepared. After reading the letter, the President formed an advisory committee on uranium. Immediate action was taken. A team of scientists and military officials was assembled with one goal: to research whether uranium could be developed into a weapon. Following the committee's findings, the U.S. government began funding Enrico Fermi and Leo Szilard. Their mission: to study nuclear chain reactions and figure out how to separate different isotopes of uranium. The truth is, the uranium naturally found on Earth is mostly uranium-238. Less than 1% is uranium-235, and U-235 was the isotope that could be used to make a bomb. The first challenge was figuring out how to separate uranium-235 from uranium-238. Interestingly, the scientists on this project were told not to inform Albert Einstein. The U.S. government feared that his political leanings were too left-wing and that he might be a security risk. At that time, Oppenheimer was conducting his own research on nuclear fission, along with Edward Teller and several others. In December 1940, another breakthrough came. Apart from uranium-235, scientists discovered another radioactive element that could also be used to make nuclear weapons. They named it plutonium. On October 11, 1941, President Roosevelt sent a message to British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, suggesting that the two nations should work together on atomic weapons development. And then, just 2 months later, on December 7, 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. America officially entered World War II. President Roosevelt announced that the United States would join the Allied powers to fight against Germany and Japan. But at this point in time, one thing became clear. The mission to develop nuclear weapons, which had started as a purely scientific mission, had now turned into a military mission. The United States spent $2.2 billion on this single project, and if you account for inflation, that's about $24 billion today. The U.S. military had an engineering division called the Army Corps of Engineers. Normally, they built things like ports, airfields, and roads for the Army. But in June 1942, President Roosevelt approved their involvement in building a nuclear weapons. Their North Atlantic Division office was in Manhattan, New York City. After being given responsibility for the project, they set up their headquarters on the 18th floor of the very same building, and they named it the Manhattan Engineer District. This was the point when the Manhattan Project officially began. The date, August 13, 1942. The very next month, September 17, Colonel Leslie Richard Groves was appointed as the head of the project. And Groves made one key decision. Julius Robert Oppenheimer would be the leader for designing the atomic bomb. To keep the project secret, they chose a hidden location, Oak Ridge, in the state of Tennessee. This town was nicknamed the Secret City. Why? Because an entire city was built here, solely for this project. Thousands of scientists, researchers, and workers were moved into this secret city. Their only job, to turn uranium-238 into uranium-235. Now here's the key thing to understand. Uranium-238 is not very fissile, meaning it cannot sustain a chain reaction, so it can't be used directly to make a bomb. Uranium-235, however, can sustain a chain reaction, and that's why extracting it was absolutely crucial. The plan was to try 4 different methods to separate uranium-235 from uranium-238. These were the 4 different technologies tried to separate uranium-235 from uranium-238. Gaseous diffusion, centrifuge, electromagnetic separation, liquid thermal diffusion. After testing all 4, only 2 methods proved to be somewhat successful: electromagnetic separation and gaseous diffusion. In electromagnetic separation, a large magnet is used to pull uranium-235 apart from uranium-238. In gaseous diffusion, uranium hexafluoride gas is passed through a porous membrane. The lighter U-235 molecules slip through the membrane, while the heavier U-238 molecules get filtered out. Meanwhile, in another location, Washington, work was underway on the production of plutonium. Plutonium is actually produced from uranium-238 itself. When an isotope of hydrogen is bombarded onto uranium-238, plutonium is formed. Later, it was discovered that plutonium was even more radioactive and more fissionable than uranium-235. Along with these 2 sites, a third location was being searched for, a place called Project Y. This would be the site where the actual design and construction of the bombs would take place. General Groves wanted this location to be remote, completely cut off, so the project could remain secret. Oppenheimer knew exactly such a place where he had happily spent his summers, surrounded by mountains and endless skies, the Pecos Valley in the state of New Mexico. Once these 3 locations were finalized, only one obvious step remained: to practically test a chain reaction. Until now, everything was theory. Someone had to prove whether an atomic bomb could actually work. On December 2, 1942, scientist Enrico Fermi did exactly that. Inside a squash court at the University of Chicago, they initiated the first ever chain reaction, enough to light up a single bulb. By this time, General Groves had become deeply impressed with Oppenheimer's brilliance. He wanted him as the director of Project Y. But not everyone agreed. Some senior military officials were suspicious of Oppenheimer, the same way they had once been suspicious of Einstein. His friends, his wife, even his brother, were staunch communists. And Oppenheimer himself had been heavily influenced by left-wing ideology. America feared that these political leanings could be dangerous. Despite these concerns, Groves stood firm. He insisted, without Oppenheimer, the project could fail. And so, on July 20th, 1943, Oppenheimer was officially appointed the leader of the project. In making an atomic bomb, Oppenheimer's expertise was vital, especially in calculating something called critical mass. Critical mass is the minimum amount of uranium-235 or plutonium needed to start and sustain a chain reaction. In other words, the smallest amount that can cause a nuclear explosion. Today, this might sound straightforward, but back then, there were far too many unknowns. Very little was understood about uranium-235 and plutonium-239. It had only been discovered in 1940. By the end of 1943, just 2 milligrams had ever been produced. That's why the United States decided to develop 2 bombs. Little Boy, based on uranium-235. It used a gun-type mechanism. 2 subcritical masses of uranium-235 were fired together at high speed. When they collided, they reached critical mass, triggering a fission chain reaction and creating an explosion. Fat Man, based on plutonium-239. Its design was far more complex. The gun-type method wouldn't work here. If two masses of plutonium were simply fired together, they would react too quickly, ending the chain reaction before reaching critical mass. So, scientists created a completely different approach. The implosion method. The plutonium core was placed inside a hollow sphere, surrounded by carefully arranged explosives. When detonated, these explosives sent immense pressure inward, compressing the plutonium until it reached critical mass. The gun method was already proven, but the implosion method, it existed only on paper. Oppenheimer insisted it had to be tested. General Groves refused at first. We have too little plutonium to waste. But Oppenheimer argued the risk of not testing was even greater. Eventually, Groves agreed, and so the Trinity test was born. In the deserts of New Mexico, scientists assembled a test bomb called the Gadget. It contained about 13 pounds of plutonium. They mounted it on a steel tower, 100 feet high. On July 16, 1945, at exactly 5:30 a.m., the desert lit up brighter than the sun. The explosion completely vaporized the steel tower. In its place, a green, glass-like substance was formed, slightly radioactive, and later named trinitite. Watching the fireball rise, Oppenheimer recalled the words from the Bhagavad Gita, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." Oppenheimer was a Sanskrit scholar and had studied the Gita in its original form. He often said it was one of the most influential books of his life. Less than a month later, on August 6, 1945, the little boy bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. 3 days later, the Fat Man bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. The world would never be the same again. Albert Einstein's first reaction after hearing the news was a sad statement. It is believed that Einstein once said, "Mankind invented the atomic bomb, but no mouse would ever construct a mousetrap." Oppenheimer, after the Hiroshima bombing, expressed great satisfaction. He believed it would have been even better if such a weapon could have been used against Nazi Germany and Hitler. But when the bomb was dropped on Nagasaki, Oppenheimer was deeply shocked. On August 17, he personally went to Washington to meet the Secretary of War. In his hands, he carried a letter he had written himself. In it, he directly stated that he wanted nuclear weapons to be banned. He felt a heavy sense of regret. He began to question what he had done and what kind of technology he had put into the hands of humanity. Oppenheimer considered the first bomb on Hiroshima a necessary evil. But now he feared the future, wondering how different countries might use this terrible technology in the years to come. Meanwhile, in April 1945, U.S. President Roosevelt passed away. Harry Truman became the next president. About 2 months after the Nagasaki bombing, Oppenheimer got the opportunity to meet Truman. During the meeting, he told him directly, "I have blood on my hands." Truman became so angry after hearing this that he began cursing. He told his secretary to throw Oppenheimer out of the office. "I never want to see this man again." Later, Oppenheimer worked with the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission, hoping to prevent future nuclear attacks by controlling nuclear weapons. But in 1949, when President Truman approached the commission with the idea of developing a hydrogen bomb, Oppenheimer strongly opposed it. His opposition had little effect. America went ahead, developing and testing the hydrogen bomb in 1952. The scientist Edward Teller played a key role in building it and is remembered today as the father of the hydrogen bomb. Because of Oppenheimer's resistance and his left-wing political leanings, he was eventually stripped of his job. He spent the rest of his life in academia, traveling the world, giving lectures. Although he was nominated for the Nobel Prize 3 times, he never won. In 1965, Oppenheimer died of throat cancer at the age of just 62. Perhaps unsurprising, given that he had been a heavy chain smoker all his life. Finally, the invention of the atomic bomb stands as one of the most powerful, yet most dangerous, developments in human history. On one hand, it helped end World War II and saved millions of lives. But on the other, it planted the seeds for catastrophic risks that humanity may face in the future. Even today, with 9 nations possessing nuclear weapons, their use could determine the fate of humanity itself. And so, nuclear power, in our hands, is a responsibility. True success lies not in using it for destruction, but in using it for the prosperity of mankind. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more fascinating stories and facts. And hit that bell icon so you never miss an update.